We're talking today with Bob Green of Kentwood, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, so Bob, get us started with a little bit of background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Newcastle, Indiana in 1943, January of 1943.
All right. And did you grow up there or did you move around?
I grew up there, but our family had moved a lot, and we moved to other little small communities around. But I ended up in Newcastle, and that's where I graduated in high school at.
All right. And what was your family doing for a living when you were a kid?
My mother was a housewife, and sometimes she worked at a canning factory at Mount Summit for Brooks Food to help Dad out. But Dad worked in a factory at Chrysler Corporation in Newcastle, and he was a skilled trade sheet metalman. And my dad was there for close to 40 years.
Okay. So was he doing that work back during World War II? Or?
Yes, and because my dad had an illness where he couldn't be drafted or go in, and he felt his duty was to help supply, and Chrysler went on to making bullets and stuff, and he felt obligated to do his part there.
Right, so he's in the defense industry.
Yeah.
So, okay, all right. And then when did you graduate from high school?
I graduated in 1961.
Okay, and what did you do when you got out?
I immediately went in the Navy because the story is that I actually joined the Naval Reserve. They offered a deal for people that was juniors in high school. I went and joined when I was a junior in high school, went to boot camp between my junior and senior year, and then when I come back, I graduated, and then I went right on active duty.
Okay. So when you did that boot camp while you were still a high school kid, was that boot camp with everybody else, or did they have? Okay.
It was at Great Lakes, Illinois.
Okay, but you were in there with the guys who were a little bit older than you,
yes.
and not in that program.
Yes.
Okay. Well, a lot of people today don't really know what boot camp was like. Can you describe what happens when you arrive there, for instance?
Well, it's when you arrive there, it's pretty hectic because everybody wants, the people's in charge wants to be in charge, and they assign you a barracks and a rack and some place to sleep and a locker, and you start putting yourself up, and then it's getting up early in the morning and going until late at night, and sometimes the guy gets aggravated at you, the chief petty officer, he yells you to go out with a paintbrush and clean up around the curbs. And so it was exciting. It was an experience.
Okay.
Especially for a young guy.
Sure. Yeah. What were they actually teaching you, the classes or the training?
Well, it was basically about what it was going to be like when you got inactive, and especially if you went on a ship. And I told him when I went in, that's what I wanted to do, because the motto back in was join the Navy and see the world. And that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I got to do. And so they was showing about, you was learning the sport and the starboard and everything, and they was getting you fit. What they did is training. The training was to a lot of marching and a lot of drills and stuff like that, but it was to get you in mindset, I think, to do what you was told when you was on the active duty part. And it seemed to work pretty well. I thought the training there fit right in good when I went on active duty.
Okay. Now, how easy or hard was it for you to adjust to the boot camp situation?
Well, I had it in my mind that I had 4 uncles that was in the Navy and World War II, and they was explaining what their situation was. So I kind of knew what to look out for. So what I tried to do is just stay out of trouble and do what I was told. And that worked out pretty good.
Okay, well, all right. About how long was the boot camp?
My boot camp was only about a month. Okay. And I went up in the summer, and before school started, I was back home and back in school again.
Okay. Now, when you were in boot camp, did you ever actually get onto a ship of any kind?
No, it was all up at Great Lakes, Illinois in this thing, so.
Right.
We done firefighting, we had to go into the buildings where the tear gas was without masks on and stuff like that. And they give you an example about what you could experience when you got in and wherever you had to go. Because they didn't know where you was gonna be going either.
Okay.
And so they just trained everybody the same. And then you had to, and I felt like they done a good job.
Okay. All right. So a year later then, you come back and you now go on active duty.
Yes, after I graduated from high school.
Right. So what was your first assignment?
My first assignment, as soon as I graduated, a week after I graduated, I got sent to Key West, Florida, to go on board a subtender, the USS Bushnell. And and it was a tender that tended about 12 subs, including the Nautilus that was brand new at that time, because the Nautilus pulled in when we was down there. And after a few weeks, they transferred me to really Portsmouth, Virginia, to go on board the USS Donner. And that was a landing ship dock, and so it's an amphibious Navy. And it was in dry dock when I got there, but it was actually, the home station was Little Creek, Virginia, but it was in dry dock being serviced when I went aboard.
Okay.
And
Okay. Let's back up a little bit here. In that time that you spent on the subtender,
yeah.
what were you doing?
I was actually doing storekeeping. I was taking care of records, and there, it seems funny. When I look on the internet now, you got Google now, but back then you had a bunch of file cards, walls of them, and you had to make sure everything was in the right place.
Okay.
And so everything was filed by file cards,
Right.
and that's what I did.
Now, did they have to teach you how to do that?
Yes, because I didn't have a clue.
Yeah, that would not have been in boot camp.
No.
Okay. Well, I don't know. Did you like Key West while you were there?
I did, but I was there for long enough because, it's a little island and you can't do much and you're 167 miles away from Miami. And so it was an experience to go down there and spend the time I did. But I was glad when I got transferred because I wasn't going to go to that subtender, never did pull out.
Okay. Yeah, because the subtender, most of the time, the submarines come to it.
Yeah, it comes to it.
Okay.
And so I'm sitting there thinking, this is not going to be what I was looking for.
Did you request a transfer, or did they just reassign
Well,
you?
no, it was a temporary assignment
Okay.
down there, and then they was going to figure out that length of time for me to go somewhere else, and so they sent me to the ship I was on, which I'm glad they did, because I liked it.
All right. So let's then go back then to your story. So your ship is in dry dock, and so what do you do while it's still in dry dock?
Well, it was only in dry dock for 3 or 4 days. I really technically got a little aggravated because I was wanting a ship that was going to travel. When I went and seen there was no water under it, that was pretty discouraging to me. And I actually, being as young as I am, 18, just turned 18, I went down and got in the phone booth, called my mom, and said, "Mom, this ain't going to work out." I said, "That ship don't even have no water in it." And so I went back aboard, and one of the guys said, "Well, are you ready for a trip?" And I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, we're going to make a South Atlantic trip." John Kennedy sent 5 ships on a cruise that was called the South Atlantic Cruise, and we visited countries that hadn't been visited since World War II, and went and visited places. So that was where we're going. And I thought, whoopee. And so we pulled out, and we was gone for several months. But in that, we ended up over in the Indian Ocean, and it was we went to Trinidad and picked a rear admiral up. And on the way down, I went across the equator and got a card that says that I crossed the equator on September 29th, 1961. And it just so happens that was my dad's birthday. And so then we went around the Cape of Good Hope, that was southern tip of Africa, that was real rough in October. Went around October 12th, 1961, and that happened to be my mother's birthday. And so, anyway, when we went to, after we left Trinidad, we went to Simonstown, South Africa, and then we went to Cape Town, and then we went around the tip and went to Port Elizabeth, And some of the ships that was with us went on up to Durban and other on up. And, but we had the Admiral on board our ship. And so he was making connections and everything. So we stayed in Cape Town and Port Elizabeth. And so then we had to come, after a couple of weeks, we came back.
Okay. Now we want to back up a little bit. Now, you mentioned the kind of ship you were on, a landing ship dock.
Yeah.
Describe that for us. What did it look like? How big was it?
Well, good thing I can't show a picture. I got a picture, but the thing of it is, it's a ship that will actually balance down, and the tailgate would open up, and it was a big hole inside the ship that was 300 foot long and 50 foot wide. And we could actually pull 3 LCUs that was less than 100 foot inside our ship, balance up, and take them somewhere. They're all loaded down too. And so we was a kind of like a transport ship for heavy equipment. And so then we could actually put a mezzanine deck in, a deck between the flight deck and the well deck is what we called it, all the way down. And then we could store equipment on it. So one time, it took us 40 hours to load the ship with marine gear and tanks and 6x and jeeps and stuff to put on the ship. And then we went to Vieques Island and had to unload it. And the Marine Corps, they had a exercise for like 3 weeks. And then we had to come back, pick them all up, take them all back. So it was a ship that we was a transport ship, and we carried Army and Marines and not many personnel, but a lot of their equipment.
Right. Okay. Now, was this basically a cousin of the landing ship tank, the LST?
Yes. Yeah. Matter of fact, we had an LST with us when we went on this cruise. It was the USS Suffolk County, 1173, and so it's. But the LST would open up in the front and come down. We opened up. We just sunk our ship and balanced down and put water all the way up inside the ship, and just let the boats and pulled in our ship.
Okay. So this is a flat bottom boat.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
Kind of rough.
So what is that like when you're in rough weather?
Well, it's not good, and cause when we went around the Cape of Good Hope, it was a good sunny day, and we locked everything, tied everything down on our ship, and you could see waves up in front of you, and because the Indian Atlantic Ocean is too different, and it's kind of the roughest part in the world in October of turbulent, and it took us 3 days to go through there, and we was taking 48-degree rolls each way, and then going up and down, and you couldn't hardly walk, and you had to have tennis shoes on, and you had to learn how to stay aboard the ship, because you couldn't go out because you'd get swept over. Waves would come all the way over the top of you, and so that was a pretty hairy experience there.
Okay. Now, you were from Indiana.
Yeah.
Aside from a little bit of Lake Michigan, Indiana is landlocked.
Yeah.
So that it must have been a little bit of a shock to the system to be out there on the ocean.
Oh, well, it's something since I had 4 uncles that served in the Navy in the World War II, and they talked highly of it. One of them had 2 ships that blowed out from under him. And so I was sitting there, and I thought, well, they made it interesting. Okay. And they act like that was a good, pleasant time for them, even though they was in war. And so they made my curiosity thinking, I want to go into the Navy. And that's what I did. And so
when you hit that rough weather and going around the Cape of Good Hope, did you wonder at all if maybe the ship was going to capsize or sink?
Yes, because our ship was only equivalent. It had a thing in every compartment of what the ship was capable of taking. Well, a 48-degree roll was what it was. And we was taking 45 to 48-degree rolls. And I'm sitting there thinking, boy, just a little bit more, and we're going to be flipping over. And so it was kind of, especially when you're watching that meter up there, because it'd probably been best to not have it in there, because I think it scared a lot of people, because, they didn't care about the 40 or 45 degree drill. When it got up to 48 and it had a sign there, this ship is capable of taking a 48-degree roll. Now, that's not too comfortable when you had to go to sleep while it's doing that.
Right.
So you had to tie yourself into bed. You had to take seat belts and when you got in the rack, you took belts and put across you. Because if you didn't, you'd roll out of bed because the ship would roll over too far.
Okay. Yeah. Did you get seasick at all?
No, I didn't.
How did you manage not to get seasick?
Well, there was a old-timer War II veteran that was in there, and he told people that was getting seasick. He didn't tell me, I just heard him tell people. We had crackers on board ship, barrels of crackers that you could take, you know, it's in packages, and he said the reason why you get seasick is because you're not eating and you're not keeping your stomach full. So, I don't know whether that was true or not, but he said, if you start feeling kind of woozy, eat some crackers, and I did, and I never did get seasick. So whether that was a myth or not, it worked. So I just sat there and I did when I felt bad, even though you didn't feel like eating, because you was feeling bad, it was a thing that once you ate something, you felt better. And so, because once you got sick, you didn't want to eat at all.
Right. Okay. What were your duties on board that ship?
I was in a department that was 2nd Division, and we took care. We had two 86-ton cranes, one on each side, and I run one of them cranes, and then back on the other side of the crane was the flight deck. We had helicopters, and we carried helicopters, and we would, our duties was to take care, make sure the helicopter got landed and locked down good, and I run a crane. Anytime that crane was running, I run an 86-ton crane. And one of the duties was the captain's gig was right there next to the crane, and you'd have to take it off and put it up beside the ship, and the captain to get in. Then you had to swing it out over, even if it's rough water, and get it over the water and drop it, or put it in the water without dropping it. He didn't like dropping stuff, and then you'd unhook it, and so then the trick then was to pick it back up and put it back in the skid once it come back. But we done whatever we required in the half end of the well deck. We had another division up front, the 1st Division, that took care of the anchors and the front of the deck. And so we done that, and a lot of painting, a lot of cleaning up, because every place we pulled in, since we was on a goodwill cruise, we almost had to wash the whole ship down or paint it before it went in, because they didn't want it to look scroungy. And so we done a lot of that, and so even at sea, painting the dang thing at sea, and so that was interesting.
Well, I guess as a crane operator, you wouldn't necessarily be occupied with that all the time.
No.
There'd just be certain, especially when you're at sea and traveling anywhere.
You was then you had the other duties of you had to stand watch, and I was what they called a 1 JV talker. And the way the JV talker was up in wheelhouse, or up in where the captain sat, and all the information had to come through me, and to me, and then I had to tell the captain or whoever the OOD of the deck was at the time, if the captain wasn't there, what was saying, because you had the starboard watch, port watch, after watch, main control, all this stuff, after steering, all on the phone talking to you, basically at the same time sometimes, and he was wanting to know what's going on. And then you had a recorder there that was a quartermaster, and he was writing everything down in the ship's log. And so there's the ship's log is something that I'd like to have now, and but it's a thing that's very interesting. There's a lot of things happens at sea that you don't expect, and so you would think, well, what do you do at sea? Well, it's thing when you're at sea. In my case, was we seen a big fire out on the horizon, and we head toward it because we thought it was a ship sinking or exploded. There wasn't nothing there. Radar picked it up, you can see it visually, and it wasn't there. We had to just go on. There wasn't nothing. And there, if something sank or was there, you would have seen it. No more. it only took us about an hour to get to it because it was 20 miles away. And so you had weird things, it seems like, that happened at sea. And at sea was the best time of my life because I love being at sea. And so I like that part.
Okay. Now, it seems to me sort of a crane operator, or or your other duties there with helping with the communications, those seem like they're fairly important things to do.
Yeah.
And you were an 18-year-old kid.
Yes.
So, I mean, was that just normal to assign new guys to those kinds of jobs?
Well, I don't know how they picked who they wanted, but the crane was kind of interesting to me when I went aboard. So one day I just went on top of it and looked around and seeing what the controls looked like and everything. And one of the petty officers hollered up, say, "Hey, train that thing around and drop that hook." I thought, oh my goodness. And so I figured it out. And then they thought, for somebody that never run one before, he done pretty good. So my job was kind of put there then. I think that's how they picked me. But I thought it was a challenge, and I loved it. And but you're right. It wasn't a thing that you did all the time. And so I had other duties aboard ship. I was the Lieutenant J.G. I was his yeoman at one time when we wasn't doing anything. I was just kind of secretary and had an office to sit in, and so wasn't really much to do there either. But they just, when they got people and you're got everything done, they just assign you jobs that, just so you have something to do.
Right.
And they ain't gonna let you just be around there freely doing nothing.
All right. Now, you mentioned you went on that first cruise. Basically, was Trinidad your first stop?
Yes.
Okay. And you go to Trinidad, and from Trinidad, did you go straight to South Africa, or?
Went to Simontown, South Africa,
Okay.
14 days.
All right. All right. Now, did you get to go ashore in these places?
Yeah, went ashore in Simonstown, and Simonstown there wasn't much there, so there was a train there, and us guys went to Cape Town, and we took the train and went to Cape Town. Now, Cape Town was nice, and so we liked it. And so then when we pulled into Cape Town for 2 weeks, it was pleasant because we all wanted to be there. Port Elizabeth was more of a town that didn't have it was fun, it was all right to visit, but it wasn't no place to be, in my opinion. And so, anyway, I can tell you the story after we left Cape Town too.
Okay.
Okay, when we left Cape Town, after we went around and we come back to Cape Town for the last time, we pulled up and went out and went to the Congo, and there was actually what they called a Congo crisis going on then. And so anyway, we had on our ship, since we was on a goodwill cruise, we had big conic boxes full of Bibles and supplies and stuff like that, and there was missionary stations there, so we took helicopters and flew into these mission stations, even though they had a conflict going on there. And so we stayed there for about a week, right at where the Congo River emptied out into the Atlantic. And then when we took off in early November, and then on November 10th, we crossed the equator on the way back, and that happened to be the Marine Corps birthday. So the Marines that we did have aboard, we threw them a big party. But the reason why we left the Congo is because in Liberia, where we was going, President Tubman, the president of Liberia was a country that people, when slavery was dismissed, the United States paid them people that wanted to go back to Africa. And they went and chose this place in Liberia and made up. So they didn't know how to run a country, so they set it up the same way the United States. They set it up as a president, a Congress, Senate, and everything. And then their flag is the same as ours, except it's got one big white star in it. And so, anyway, President Tubman wanted us to come to Harper, Liberia. That was where he was born. And we had a birthday party for him there. And then then he invited us to go to Monrovia, which was the capital, and we went to Monrovia, and he went through a big party for us. And so anyway, he came to the ship. He was a big guy, and he looked like a linebacker. And but he come out to the ship, and we had a big, huge, about as, real big, maybe 5 by 8 cake, and it had on there, "Happy Birthday, President Tubman." And so anyway, he was, and the ships, we had all 5 ships there at that time, and we circled the harbor, and I don't know, we manned the rail. Everybody was in dress uniform on every deck, about a yard apart, on all 5 ships, and he came out to come to our ship and come aboard. So he just thought that was amazing. Everybody giving him that much respect. And so we spent a few days there, and then we took off and went to Sierra Leone, and then Conakry, and so we wasn't there much. We went and pulled in Conakry to get fuel. We was low on fuel, and so they had a fuel station. So they went and pulled us in, but we had to get out of there before we got full, so we had to go meet a tanker and finish filling up at sea. But it was then after all that, we ended up going back to Trinidad and dropping that Admiral off. And then we come back up through the Virgin Islands, and we stopped at St. Croix, St. Thomas, and Puerto Rico, and so it was kind of fun. Then I went and also was in 62. That was all in 61. The last part of 62, that's when the Cuban Missile Crisis started. And so we got sent down there, and so we was there right again. Now at first we couldn't go, we didn't even go into Guantanamo Bay. We just sailed around and made sure there were no ships coming in, and they had ships all the way around on that blockade, and stopping Russian ships from coming in, or at least going aboard and see what they had. And so anyway, but then we stayed there for about, probably 2 months, and then we come back to the States, and then we ended up going back to Cuba, but this time we went into Guantanamo Bay, and we stayed at Guantanamo Bay. Now, we never did get out beyond our line, because Guantanamo Bay is owned by the United States, and it's got a big high fence there. And so when I was there, there was a lot of, like 100 yards of no man land, and there was 2 fences, one on the United States side, one on Cuba's side, and you could go up at a fence, and there was actually Russians on their side, and they was all armored, and we had 10,000 Marines on our side, and so, but they kept us. We had to go to sea a lot, because I think their basic thing was Navy ships is no good fighting when they're in port. And they found that out in Pearl Harbor. So every time they thought a conflict was going to start, we all pulled out at sea so we could put a fight on. And one of the ships that came down when we was at Cuba, for a show of force, was the USS Enterprise. The aircraft carrier was brand new, and it was on a shakedown cruise at the same time why Cuban Missile Crisis was going on. And so they brought it down, and every day they fired these planes off, and they could end up firing, they had 3 catapults, and they could fire a plane off like every 15 seconds. So I think they was showing Cuba, if you mess with us, you're you're messing with the wrong people.
Okay. So while this was going on, especially that first part where you were just staying off the coast, the first time you were down there, how much did you know about what was going on?
You know what? We didn't. All the way down when we was going, we was wondering where we was going, and because you don't get too much television reception, and the television reception was bad anywhere at that time. And so until we got there, and we was there for a few days, we didn't even know where we was at, because nobody would tell you. And so then we found out that we was in Cuba, and we found out what was going on, and then we thought, wow. But you know, at 18 years old, you think you can whip the world, and you say, well, that'll happen. So.
Okay. All right. So you've had certainly a share of adventures. I guess when you were doing that, when you were at Cuba, do you remember what your ship was carrying? Were you carrying landing craft or helicopter? Yes. Okay.
We had LCUs aboard, and that was full of tanks and stuff. And we had 3 of them, and they had probably 4 or 5 tanks on each LCU, and then we had tanks on the muzzling duct. So we could have made a landing if we had to.
Okay.
And with the help of the Marines, of course.
Do you remember if they were Marine Corps tanks or Army tanks? Or?
They was the Army.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So once you then get back then from Cuba, now what happens?
Well, we actually went to New York City, and we spent some time in New York, and then we ended up going to Philadelphia and Baltimore and stuff, and just traveling around. And but basically, the only time, the 2 years that I was on board ship, the only time we was in the States in the real hard winter time was in December, except for 61. 61, we was on that cruise.
Right.
But we come back in on the second one, and for 10 days, we had a 3-section Liberty. So you had to keep 2 sections, 1 section be on shore, but they would be recalled if they need. You had 1 section that go on leave, and then you had another section that stayed aboard the ship. So, because it had to be capable to pull out at any time. And so the ship was, we needed to show force like that, but in the wintertime, we pulled in and give each section 10 days to go home for Christmas. And then we pulled back out and went south. Our port then was Puerto Rico, San Juan, because we wanted to be, our captain wanted to be where it was warm.
Okay. All right. And then when you were, how long did you stay around Puerto Rico?
We stayed there for about maybe 4 or 5 weeks. Now, we just didn't stay at Puerto Rico.
Okay.
There again, we went back to St. Croix, St. Thomas, St. Kitts, and all these little islands out around there, Jamaica. And so, and we went to Haiti. And so it was a thing where, we went and pulled in, or we anchored out at Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and we had to run Liberty boats, and you had to go in on boats. And so we was at Port-au-Prince, Haiti, and that was right around when they had the Haiti crisis. And I don't know whether that was a little bit before or after, I forgot that.
Well, Haiti has a lot of crises.
Yes, they do. They do.
But yeah, there's often sort of trouble there. I guess, you know, you're going ashore in all of these different places, the Caribbean islands and South Africa and West Africa and so forth. Were there things that struck you about what the places looked like or how the people lived, or things that were different from, you know, the world you came from?
Well, when we was in Conakry, Africa, I think that's just a little north of Sierra Leone.
Yeah, it's the capital. It's Guinea is the country.
Okay,
it's
and
part
so
of it,
they lived in. We went out, and they lived in like grass huts and stuff, you know. And their town, they didn't have cement buildings or brick buildings or something like that. It was kind of primitive, and the people was pretty nice and everything, and they treated you friendly. But it was a place that you could see was a little different. And now, when we was in Liberia, we had modern cities, except when you got out of Monrovia or Harper or one of the bigger cities, and then they went primitive. But it was a thing that it was different, and so it was an experience, and that was a good experience for me, seeing how other people.
Right. Now, did you have some black seamen on your ship?
The what?
Were all the people on your ship white, or did you have black crewmen too?
Oh, we had we had black people aboard, and and then back then we didn't even notice we didn't identify, there wasn't too much racism on board ship because everybody knew that we had the same color of blood and you protected each other. And so we had people that we all went on liberty together, we all got in the same fights together, and so it was not no problem. But having we didn't have a lot of minority. We had people that was working their way from other countries to be citizens.
Right.
They was taking care of the officers and.
I know they were using Filipino stewards for a while. Okay. Well, I asked the question in part because you went to South Africa. And in South Africa, in the early 60s, apartheid was in place.
Yes, it was.
So were you told anything about that, or did the black crewmen not go ashore? Or?
No, we wasn't told about it. It's what you knew for yourself. But there was places in South Africa, if a black person went in place by themselves, they wasn't waited on or served or anything else. So that's the reason why we took them with us, and we kind of forced the issue. If they want something to eat or drink or something like that, well, that's what we're going to do. And so they didn't treat them right, no. And even in Cape Town. And so Cape Town's probably where it all started out there in Johannesburg. And so, anyway, it was, that was a thing, but it was a thing where we didn't hesitate to back our brothers up.
Right. Okay. Where were you when your active duty period ended?
I was back in the States in Little Creek, Virginia, and when it ended, and so anyway, I think they dismissed me like 3 days early, and the reason why I got out 3 days early, the ship was getting ready for another cruise, and it was going to go to the Mediterranean, and so I had a chance to ship over. At that time, when I first went in, my goal was to go in and get my time done and get out. But afterwards, I kind of wished I would extend it and went on the med cruise because I love traveling. And when I seen a friend of mine that lives down at Marshall, Michigan, that got to go on the med cruise, he said he had a blast. And so, but I'd had to sign up for 2 more years, and I thought, I really don't want to do that. I had a thing, I don't know whether you ever heard of back in the 60s, early 60s, you had a thing where they give different ways to get in the service. One of them was called Kitty Cruiser. Have you ever heard of that?
I don't think so.
When you joined, if you joined at 17 or 18, you was out the day before you was 21. And so, but the way I joined, I got out before I was 21.
Right.
Because I only had 2 years after I got out. Since I went in and through boot camp through my junior and senior year, I got out before I was 21. And so, and my goal was to get in and get out, get my duty done. And that's when, I got out really at 63 with my DD-214. I didn't get my discharge until June of 66.
Right, because you still had a reserve obligation after that.
Yes, but I didn't have to attend no meetings or anything.
And since you were Navy and not Army or Marine Corps, they weren't going to call you back for Vietnam.
No. Well, they couldn't.
They,
way I looked at it and the way I heard it then, once you done a tour of duty, back then when you enlisted, they would have to get everybody, because they had the draft, they could have to draft everybody before they recalled you back up. And that's what really I see wrong now. The draft has been taken away, and now they can just recall you anytime. And some of the guys is with Afghanistan and Iraq for several tours. And that's not good for them.
No,
it's
always.
not a good thing.
Okay. Now, are there other particular things about your active duty time that stand out in your memory that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, Probably, but I can't remember.
Okay, all right. So you get out, you're still pretty much a kid at this point. You're not even 21 yet. What did you do after you got out?
Well, I went and there was a place, back then you could find a job at any time, anywhere. And especially if you was got out with an honorable discharge out of service.
Right.
And so there was a place there in town that was hired, it was called Newcastle Products. They made modern fold doors. So I hired in there for a year, and right across the street was Chrysler Corporation, which was really large. My dad worked there, my uncles worked there, and so one day I seen them lined up, so I just took the day off and went over and got in line, and I got hired on that very day. Soon they found out my dad worked there, his brothers worked there, my mom's brothers worked there. They said, well, why didn't you put that down on your application? I said, well, they've already had a job. And so, but anyway, I got hired on it, and I stayed there from 63 or 64 until 81. And then I could see the writing on the wall. They kept going down, down, down. And so I quit and went to Allison Gas and Turbine at Indianapolis because I was a tool and die maker. And I went to Allison Gas and Turbine. They made aircraft engines, military engines. And so I went over there and worked until Rolls-Royce bought it. And then Rolls-Royce bought it, and I worked there for Rolls for 10 years. Then I retired, but I had a good job. I've never been without a job since I got out of the Navy.
All right. And how did you wind up in Michigan?
Well, could be that my wife, I got talking to her, and I connected with her actually on the internet. I started talking to her, and I was, so we decided to visit each other. So I came up and I visited her, and finally I just kept visiting her, and finally I just come up, I just retired and come up and married her.
Oh, very
And
good.
so, but that's the reason why I came to Michigan. But it's nothing, I like Michigan, so
Okay.
I don't have no problem being here.
All right. Now, I guess when you look back at your time in the service, how do you think that affected you, or what did you take out of it?
I think it affected me by making me a better person, because I was in a lot of trouble before then. I'd have probably ended up in jail or prison or something, because I was kind of cantankerous, and even a little bit while I was in the Navy. And but I had a division officer that took care of me fine, and he's a guy that helped me out a lot. And if it wasn't for him, I'd have probably would not had an honorable discharge when I got out. But his name was Lieutenant J.G. Gideon, and he was going for, he almost had 30 years in. He started out as a boot camp through boot there and worked his way up as an officer. And he was a man that I highly respected. I was scared of, because the guy was mean. But I think the reason why I done what he told me, because I was scared of him. And I went in here, last year, we had a ship's reunion. Our ship has a reunion every year. And so last year, my wife and I hosted it here in Grand Rapids, and people came. But the first time I went to the ship's reunion. It was at Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And the reason why I went is because I kept telling Faye, my wife, that there was a man that I'd like for her to meet, and Lieutenant J.G. Gideon. And he had just died. And so I never got there, because I was really wanting her to see him. And then when some lady asked me, said, well, who are you looking for? And I said, I'm looking for Lieutenant J.G. Gideon. She said, well, he just died last year. I said, oh. And she sat down and asked me why. And I told her how much he took care of me. She said, you'd be surprised how many people has come to the reunion and said, if it wasn't for him, but he made a better person out of me. And so then when I got out, I knew how to live.
So you had self-discipline at that point.
That time.
Yeah. Well, I suppose if he's former enlisted, so he started out like you before, so he didn't become an officer right away?
No.
Yeah, and that I found that with a lot of people I talk to, they deal with officers who had been enlisted men first, they knew what that was like.
Yeah.
And they understood better where you were coming from and how to talk to you.
Yeah, well, Lieutenant J.G. Gideon would tell me, he said, Bob, I don't know why you're doing this, because I've already did it. I've tried it, I've did it, it don't work. So I'm telling you, it ain't gonna work, so you better do what you're told. And you could believe the guy because, yeah, he had experienced it. And so I listened to his experiences, and he was a good man. If it wasn't for him, I don't think I'd have been here today, because I might have been still alive, but I wouldn't have been really a good veteran. Because I ended up being commander here in the state for the AMVET organization, and this VO, so I am a service officer, and so I was national commander for the 4th District. I would have never got that if I hadn't have done it. So I really appreciate what I had learned when I was in the Navy and the thing I did. And I wished I'd have stayed in longer. I wished I'd have took the 2 more year cruise, and maybe I'd have stayed in there for the whole 20. I don't know.
Well, you could have made it to Vietnam at some point.
Yeah, I could have.
Could have.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it makes for a good story, and one that's a little bit different from a lot of what we get. So I just like to thank you for taking the time to share it
Okay.
today.
All right.
All right.